If you're running Microsoft 365 and your SharePoint sites aren't protected with sensitivity labels and DLP policies, your data is at risk. And honestly, most tenants I see in the wild have none of this configured. Today I'm going to show you exactly how to set this up, step by step, using a real tenant. No theory slides, no waffle. We'll start with sensitivity labels, apply them to SharePoint sites and documents, set up auto-labeling so you're not doing everything manually, and then build out DLP policies for both SharePoint and email. By the end of this video, you'll have a properly protected environment. And if you're planning to roll out Copilot, you really want to get this sorted first. Let's get into it. Right, let me quickly explain what we're going to build. I've got 3 SharePoint sites set up: marketing, operations, and payroll. Each one represents a different sensitivity level. Marketing is public. Anyone in the organization can access it, and the content isn't particularly sensitive. Operations is internal. It's meant for staff only, with documents that shouldn't be shared externally. And payroll is confidential. This is where national insurance numbers, salary details, and personal data live. We're going to apply sensitivity labels at 2 levels. First at the site level, what Microsoft calls container labels, and then at the document level. On top of that, we'll create auto-labeling policies to catch sensitive content automatically and DLP policies to stop that data from leaking out via SharePoint or email. That's the full picture. Let's start at the beginning. Before we can apply sensitivity labels to SharePoint sites, there are a few things we need to enable, and I want to make sure we cover all of them, because missing any one of these is the reason most deployments get stuck. Head over to the Microsoft Purview portal, go to Information Protection, and click on Sensitivity Labels. Now, the first thing to check is that your labels exist and are published. You can see here I've got public and internal labels already created. If you haven't set yours up yet, you'll need to do that first. Now look at the yellow banner at the top of this page. It says your organization hasn't turned on sensitivity labels for Office files stored in OneDrive and SharePoint. Click Turn On Now. That's the first step sorted. The second thing we need to do is enable sensitivity label support in Microsoft Entra ID for groups. This is the step that catches the most people out, and it's why the Groups and Sites scope option stays grayed out in the label editor even after you've done everything else. You need to run a couple of PowerShell commands using the Microsoft Graph module to set Enable MIP labels to true in your group.unified directory settings, and then run execute Azure add label sync to push your labels out to Entra ID. I've included the full script on the Bluefix blog, link in the description. While we're here, there's one more setting worth enabling straight away, and that's co-authoring for files with sensitivity labels. Head to Settings, then Information Protection Settings. You'll see the co-authoring toggle at the top. Tick it and click Apply. What this does is allow multiple people to edit an encrypted labeled document at the same time in Office apps. Without it, if a document has an encryption-based label like confidential, it locks to a single editor, which breaks real-time collaboration and makes your users hate sensitivity labels before they've even started. One important note: this setting is a one-way change from the portal. If you ever need to reverse it, you'll have to use PowerShell. For most organizations, that's absolutely fine. You won't want to. Now, after enabling all of these settings, it can take up to 24 hours for the Groups and Sites scope to become fully available. The SharePoint file integration is faster, usually 15 minutes, so if things don't appear immediately, give it time. Now we can start applying labels to our SharePoint sites. Head over to the SharePoint Admin Center and go to Sites, then Active Sites. You'll see all your sites listed here. I can see Bluefix Marketing, Bluefix Operations, and Payroll. Click on any site name to open the Details panel on the right, then go to the Settings tab. You'll see a sensitivity label field. Click it, and you'll get a drop-down with your published labels. Marketing gets public, Operations gets internal, and Payroll gets confidential. Hit Save after each one. Now when you apply the internal or confidential label, you'll see a yellow notice that says the sensitivity label has an inherent external file sharing setting, and it's overriding the existing one. This is not an error. This is exactly what you want. What's happening is that those labels were configured in Purview with an external sharing restriction built in. Confidential and internal Both enforce organization-only sharing, so the moment you apply the label, SharePoint automatically changes the site's external sharing setting to match. The label is enforcing your governance policy automatically, without you having to touch the sharing settings manually. That yellow notice is just SharePoint being transparent about the change it just made. Now here's something absolutely critical that a lot of people misunderstand. Container labels protect the site, not the files inside it. When you apply a sensitivity label to a SharePoint site, you're controlling things like external sharing settings, guest access, and privacy settings for that site. You are not encrypting the individual documents inside it. That's a completely separate step. Think of container labels as the fence around the property. They control who can get in. The documents inside still need their own protection, which we'll cover next. Right, now let's look at the other side of the coin, document-level labels. This is where you protect the actual files. Navigate into each site's document library and you'll see the sensitivity column. For marketing documents, we'll apply the public label. These files get minimal protection, no encryption, no restrictions on sharing. For operations, we apply the internal label. Now you'll notice the difference. These files get a header and footer, marking them as internal, and depending on your label configuration, they might restrict external sharing. And here's where it gets interesting. For payroll documents, we apply the confidential label. This is the heavy hitter. The files get encrypted, watermarked, and access is restricted to authorized users only. Even if someone downloads a confidential file and emails it to their personal account, the encryption travels with the document. They can't open it outside your tenant. That's the power of document-level sensitivity labels. Now, obviously, you don't want to sit here manually labeling every single file. That's what auto-labeling is for. Let's talk about auto-labeling, one of the most powerful features in Purview, and one that comes in two flavors worth understanding. Head back to Information Protection and find the auto-labeling section. This is where you create policies that automatically detect sensitive content, like national insurance numbers, and apply a label without the user having to do anything. Before you dive in, there's an important licensing point to flag. Service-side auto-labeling for SharePoint, OneDrive, and Exchange, the kind that scans files already sitting in your document libraries, requires Microsoft 365 E5 or the Azure Information Protection P2 add-on. It's not included in Business Premium or E3. If you go into the auto-labeling wizard and SharePoint and Exchange aren't showing as location options, only Azure storage, that's why. You're hitting a licensing wall, not a configuration problem. If you are on E5 or AIP P2, the wizard is straightforward. You choose the sensitive information type, select which SharePoint sites or Exchange mailboxes to scan, and pick the label to apply. My strong advice, always start in simulation mode. It scans your content and shows you what would be labeled without actually applying anything. Review those results carefully, check for false positives, and only then switch it to live. The simulation can take several hours, depending on how much content you have, so be patient. For those on Business Premium or E3, you do still have client-side auto-labeling. Office apps like Word and Excel can apply labels automatically when a user opens or edits a document that contains sensitive content. It's not as seamless as service-side scanning, but it gets labels applied for your active users. Now let's talk about data loss prevention, DLP. Sensitivity labels classify and protect your content, but DLP policies are the enforcement layer. They detect when someone tries to share sensitive data and take action to prevent it. Let me show you the DLP overview in Purview. You can see we've already got policies in place for SharePoint. The way DLP works is straightforward. You define conditions, like detecting a national insurance number or a file with a confidential label, and then you define actions, such as blocking the share, notifying the user, or alerting an admin. You can also customize the notification that users see so they understand why their action was blocked. For our SharePoint policy, we're detecting files that contain NI numbers and preventing them from being shared externally. The user gets a policy tip explaining what happened, and the compliance team gets an alert. That's the SharePoint side covered, but there's another channel we need to protect: email. Right, this is the big one. Let me walk you through creating a DLP policy for Exchange email from scratch. Go to Data Loss Prevention, then Policies, and click Create. Now, Microsoft gives you a load of templates here, but I find it's better to start with a custom policy so you have full control. Select Custom and click Next. Give it a clear name. I'm calling this one UK PII Protection for Email. Something descriptive, so you know exactly what it does 6 months from now when you've forgotten. On the Locations page, this is important. Turn off everything except Exchange email. You don't want this policy interfering with your SharePoint DLP policy that we've already set up. Keep them separate, keep them clean. Now we create the rule. Click Create Rule, give it a name, and here's where we define our conditions. Click Add Condition, then Content Contains, and select Sensitive Info Types. Search for UK National Insurance Number and add it. Set the instance count to 1. We want to catch even a single NI number in an email. For the actions, select Restrict Access or encrypt the content in Microsoft 365 locations. This is what actually blocks the email from being sent externally. You can also configure user notifications. I'd recommend enabling these so people know why their email was blocked rather than just getting a mysterious error. Review the summary, make sure everything looks right, and submit. There it is, policy created. It can take up to an hour for Exchange DLP policies to take effect, so don't test it immediately and assume it's broken. So we've built all of this. But how do we know it's actually working? This is where monitoring comes in, and it's a step that a lot of people skip. In Purview, you've got 3 key tools. First, DLP alerts. This is where you'll see real-time alerts when a policy is triggered. Someone tries to email an NI number externally. It shows up here. Second, Activity Explorer. This gives you a timeline view of all labeling and DLP activity across your tenant. You can see when labels were applied, when policies were matched, and filter by user, location, or activity type. It's incredibly useful for auditing. And third, Content Explorer. This shows you what sensitive content actually exists in your tenant and where it lives. If you want to know how many documents contain NI numbers across all your SharePoint sites, Content Explorer will tell you. I'd recommend checking these dashboards at least weekly when you first roll out your policies. You'll catch misconfigurations early and get a feel for your organization's data patterns. Before I wrap up, let me quickly explain why all of this matters even more if you're planning to deploy Microsoft 365 Copilot. Here's the thing. Copilot respects sensitivity labels. If a document is labeled confidential, Copilot won't surface that content to users who don't have access. But here's the catch. If your data isn't labeled, Copilot has no way to know what's sensitive and what isn't. It will happily pull payroll data into a summary for someone who has no business seeing it, as long as they technically have access to the SharePoint site. That's why getting your labels and DLP policies in place before rolling out Copilot is essential. Quick checklist. Sensitivity labels created and published, container labels applied to all SharePoint sites, auto-labeling policies running for sensitive content, and DLP policies active for SharePoint and Exchange. Get that done, and you're in a much stronger position for a Copilot deployment. That's everything. We've gone from a completely unprotected SharePoint environment to one with sensitivity labels at the site and document level, auto-labeling for sensitive content, and DLP policies covering both SharePoint and email. I've included the full step-by-step guide and all the PowerShell scripts on the Bluefix blog. Link in the description. If this was useful, hit subscribe. I've got more Microsoft 365 security content coming, including a deep dive into Purview audit logs and a full Copilot deployment guide. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.